So as promised, we turn now to a look at investing in Africa. Launching tonight, actually, at PricewaterhouseCoopers, a terrific panel. We're very pleased to have the person who put it together and one of the panelists in studio with us. First of all, I'm going to introduce Jake Bright. He's contributing editor and senior consultant at the Bloomberg Institute. He's the Whitehead Fellow at the Foreign Policy Association, co-producer of the FPA's The New Business of Africa series, and he's also a contributor on business and finance in sub-Saharan Africa at Bloomberg's proprietary brief at Newsweek, Daily Beast, and more. Also joining us in studio, very happy to have him as well, Kola Olofinboba, who's a partner at Fairview Capital, formerly a physician. Lots to talk about there, and we're going to talk about this now. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be back.
So, Jake, start by telling us, you are getting quite good at organizing these panels, getting packed attendance and getting some of the top people in the field. What's the theme tonight?
Tonight's theme is private equity in Africa, and it's part of a series we've put together, Robert Nolan and I, at the Foreign Policy Association, called The New Business in Africa. We have a partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we have several panelists that are actually doing work in private equity in Africa, and we have a packed guest list.
How big is the market getting for private equity in Africa? And maybe, Kola, I'll address this to you, because it feels like Africa needs money, wants money, and at the same time, wants to avoid sort of hot inflows of money.
That's correct. What we've seen and what makes us very excited about the opportunity for private equity is that there is a cycle of new company formation that's happening. We're having entrepreneurs who are experienced in terms of taking private investment, generating returns and returning capital to the investors. We're seeing it across multiple geographies in the country, and we're seeing managers who have gone through several cycles now of investment in Africa. And so we think there is now a good stable of funds that institutional investors who are interested in that market can participate in.
Can you put a number on it, you think? Can you put an estimate?
Yeah, the inflows have tended to be in the $1 to $2 billion range over multiple years, sometimes a little bit above that, sometimes on the low end of that. But we actually have not seen a spike in capital, despite the interest that a lot of prospects seem to have.
Well, I think it's ironic that this panel is occurring against the backdrop of what happened in Kenya over the weekend, and the terrible, basically terrorist attack, mass murders, a Somali group taking credit. It's complicated, but again, and the images are stark, and of course, terrorist attack can occur anywhere, but I think because broadly there's a question about how safe it is to do business in some African countries, and also how much has really changed in the area of corruption and that kind of thing, Jake.
Yeah, the terrorist attack in Kenya is very unfortunate. I've been on the phone with friends, and I've been to that shopping mall, and I know a lot of people that have. I think it reflects more of an international problem than an African-specific problem. And overall, security in Africa has changed quite a bit. And one of the reasons why Africa has seen such an economic boom is a lot of, on an aggregate level, a lot of security problems, and the insecurity that you saw in Africa in the 90s has largely died down. So it's very unfortunate in Kenya, but overall there's been more stability in Africa recently than there's been in quite a long time.
And I wanted to ask you this question as well, Kola, but from a slightly different perspective. I took a cab ride a couple of weeks ago. The driver originally from the Ivory Coast. He's been in New York City for more than 20 years, and I talked to him about, how things are changing. He goes, not enough. Not fast enough. The corruption is still big, and that was a kind of an insider's, an expat view here of what it's like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with him more. It's not changing fast enough. That said, when you look at it in absolute terms, so I have also been in this country now for about 22, 23 years, and when I go back, the difference between now and then is immense. In terms of government, in terms of governance, in terms of the regulatory, environment. I mean, corruption is still there, but it's not on the same scale that I grew up with. And you find a lot of the private sector essentially bypassing the governments that have not provided what they should, and now taking things into their own hand. And this is, again, why we say this is the time for private investors to be looking at the continent.
And Kathleen, if I could add one more thing, what's going on with Africa's growth miracle, and I think one thing that's affecting public sector reform is African economies are becoming more integrated with the global economy. And one example, and Bloomberg Businessweek's done a great job of reporting this, is there's been more fixed income, government bonds issued out of sub-Saharan Africa in the last year than I think the last 7. And with that comes the ratings. It comes, having to prove that there's a macroeconomic framework in place, and also having to address, globally some of these corruption issues before you can issue those bonds and get the ratings and get the investors.
Kola, how are we competing when it comes to China for getting into Africa? I mean, China definitely has a first mover advantage here, I think, right?
That's correct. You find a lot of Chinese investment across the continent. And in a lot of cases, it's infrastructure or infrastructure that's around resource related. There is an opportunity there, but again, I think the bigger opportunity, kind of what Jake alluded to, is what's happening from the consumer perspective. You have a demographic event that's happening where you have a very young and growing continent. So you have people who are coming into the middle class, becoming consumers for the first time, ever. And they need goods, they need services, they need infrastructure. And these are opportunities, for entrepreneurs. And the Chinese are there, and in many ways, they've been there early, but there's still a lot of opportunity for other people, who want to participate.
Okay, well, we're just getting started with our own roundtable here on investing in Africa. That's Kola Olofinboba. He's partner at Fairview Capital. Jake Bright is with us from the Bloomberg Institute, also from the Foreign Policy Association, expert in what is going on in sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to talk more about which countries, which industries are offering the best investment opportunities and why so many private equity companies are doing their best to get in now. This is Bloomberg Radio.
They are here because there's a panel this evening at the PricewaterhouseCoopers building around 42nd Street and Park Avenue, focusing on the dynamics of private equity and that sector in Africa, the nature and pace of private equity investment flows, for example. And it's being put together by Jake Bright, who is in studio with us. He's contributing editor and senior consultant at Bloomberg's Institute, Whitehead Fellow of the Foreign Policy Association, co-producer of FPA's The New Business of Africa series, and a contributor to a whole host of other things. And we're joined by Kola Olofinboba. He is a partner at Fairview Capital Partners based in Connecticut. It's a private equity fund of funds with $3.4 billion. And the interesting thing is that Fairview really is domestically oriented, as in US, but right now you're engaging in a partnership with a Dutch bank and looking at Africa, that they're involved in Africa, right? So you're sort of a prime example of somebody that's established that might be looking for opportunities in the continent.
That is correct. So our business has been built since 1994, since our founding, and has been US focused. We manage money for US institutions, mostly pension plans, some endowments and foundations. And we have seen an opportunity in Africa, which we think is now, and we wanted to find a credible way to enter this. And we found a partner in FMO that has been investing in Africa since 1970 and in African private equity since the mid-1990s.
And FMO is a Dutch bank?
Yes, FMO is a Dutch bank. And so they have invested off of their balance sheet, but they were also interested in looking at other ways to invest in Africa. So it's been a partnership based on that.
Well, so Kola, you are African, though you've been in the United States for more than 20 years. You started out as a doctor, an internist. So at what point, as an African who would probably be somewhat skeptical, but hoping your continent, your own country, could finally, take these steps forward that are so important, at what point did you say, this is for real? And go to Fairview and say, we've really got to get in on this?
Yes. So I would say over the last, so I've been here 22, 23 years, and over the last 4 or 5 years, I have noticed a difference. When you go back, there is an excitement that's in the air. A lot of my friends who historically all were looking to leave the country have have chosen to stay. Many of my friends are going back. I would say a lot of this seems to have started around the telecom boom about 10, 12, 15 years ago. That seems to have changed the way people interact with each other, changed the way people do business. And now we're getting second and third order type business opportunities and business formation from this. So you start to see that. You also see what's happening across the continent in terms of democratization, not exactly the democracies you're used to, but compared to the military dictatorships we had 20, 30 years ago, a huge improvement. And then the regulatory environment, as I mentioned, is also getting better. And all of these things are coming together, and you say, you know what, there is an opportunity to do well as an investor, but also do good because you're helping to create jobs and opportunity there.
Absolutely. Jake, let me ask you, and perhaps Kola, you'd answer as well. What kind of return on investment are investors looking for in order to invest in a particular country in Africa? And I know that, they're all so very different when it comes to risk profiles, etc.
Well, I think I'll let Kola weigh in specifically, but I think 5% or above is probably a target. I think private equity has been getting over 8% in Africa. I'm not sure the exact amount.
What would Fairview be happy with, Kola?
Well, we are currently in the market fundraising, so I have to be very careful what I say.
Mm-hmm.
There are things, and I don't think I can give you a specific number.
Okay.
But suffice to say, we think that for investors who are looking for investments that are not correlated with the bulk of the investment in this part of the world, there's an opportunity to do as well or better than they will in most other markets.
So, Jake, I want to ask you've got Fairview Capital Partners. You've got one of your panelists from the Carlyle Group. You've got a panelist from Blackstone. Is this are they getting in midstream? I mean, what kind, you've been doing this for a while, so is interest picking up, and is it getting, how far is it beyond, say, natural resources like oil in Nigeria, that's an obvious one, to the broader consumer-related, we don't have much of a middle class maybe in a lot of these African countries, but certainly the aided by smartphones, et cetera, there is more of that occurring.
Yeah, I think it's going well beyond commodities, and it's part of some of the things they're building out in Africa. That it's suggested that even the recent growth boom, only a third of it is related to commodities. So a lot of Africa's growth is connecting to infrastructure, to telecoms, and also to things that are connected to consumer spending. So you see a lot of deals being done around real estate, around infrastructure, around telecoms, and around consumer spending. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to do this panel is because we're trying to get beyond the macro view to get some granularity. And I found that when I speak to serious investors, a lot of them have picked up to the Africa growth miracle story. But when you start talking about the world's most sophisticated private equity companies putting down bets there, it really piques their interest on that.
So, Kola, where do you and your partners see the most opportunities?
Very, very consumer focused. So we, again, the growth, that demographic bulge that's happening, we find that particularly attractive. But it's some of the, fast moving consumer goods. Telecom remains a huge opportunity. Financial services, this is a continent it's unbanked. I think over 80% of Africans don't have any banking accounts. So again, there's a tremendous opportunity there. Things like agriculture, not just on the farming, but across the entire value chain, there's opportunity there. Infrastructure. And then you have other things, like healthcare, like education, that again create opportunity for investors to generate good returns.
Jake, tell us about some of the topics you'll be addressing on tonight's panel.
Well, we want to get, no pun intended, private equity talk, because they are very private. I'm also interested in getting into private equity's role in infrastructure. Africa's infrastructure is both incredibly challenging, but because of that, it's a massive opportunity.
Is that private equity's role, though, to, create the infrastructure, or is it a public role? Is it a governmental role in Africa?
That's one of the questions. I'm just hosting. I won't be moderating. Harry Broadman will be. But that's one of the questions that we floated. What is private equity's role in developing infrastructure? How can it help? And also, I'm curious if private equity has any CSR role, and if just being there and doing good business, corporate social responsibility, just doing great business in Africa alone, is going to create enough investment and jobs to to cover that, or does private equity see itself as having a CSR role given some of the socioeconomic challenges in Africa?
Kola, does the United States government have the right policy towards Africa, particularly when it comes to business and investing? You're smiling.
Well, that's a very, very broad, question. And,
What
In
comes
10
to mind?
words or less.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you're asked that question?
Well, let me say this. I would say it's better. It's better today than it was a year ago. I think the whole the Doing Business in Africa initiative that coming out of the State Department, the White House, I think is a huge improvement on what was essentially benign neglect for several years, and so. My fingers remain crossed, and I'm waiting to see a continuation of that.
Well, so are Africans saying, how come the Chinese are rushing in here and the U.S. is so slow? What's the talk at home?
I've heard some of that. I've heard people say that that I guess one of the things when the Chinese go to Africa is that they will go wherever the opportunities are. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've heard Africans complain that other countries or people from other parts of the world will often come and either because of State Department directives or whatnot are very hesitant, to go beyond some of the major metropolitan areas, and they don't see a lot of the opportunity that is open for investment.
So the Chinese will develop the rural, more cut-off areas, while, say, U.S. contractors or whatever will stick with the more safe metropolitan.
Yeah, and that is not restricted to the U.S. and it's most other Western countries. Mm-hmm. Are probably guilty of the same to a certain degree. But I think with what the Chinese have done, I think a lot of people, a lot of eyes are opening, to the fact that maybe there is a there. And people aren't just doing this for social good, but they're also generating good returns.
All right. Thank you so much. Kola Olofinboba, partner at Fairview Capital. He's at the PricewaterhouseCoopers Africa panel tonight. And the guy who put it all together, Jake Bright in studio with us from Bloomberg Institute Foreign Policy Association. Betty Lou in the Loop at the Half, starting right now on Bloomberg Radio.